What's going on, guys? I've debated a long time releasing this publicly because I didn't want to push people further away from Christianity, but I think the people that are spreading this message are doing just that. Um, in the past, I would say 50 or 60 years, there's been a rise in Messianic Judaism. There's been a rise in Christians getting back into their quote unquote Hebraic roots. Um, and with that, there's been certain works that have been cited to basically disprove traditional Christianity. Um, and once I say this guy's name, you're going to know. And if you don't know, then you're about to learn. So, anytime you've ever heard someone say that Christmas is associated with Nimrod, or Christmas is associated with Tammuz, or it's associated with sun worship, Sol Invictus, right? Um, if you've heard about Easter being Eostre, right? The Christmas tree is a pagan idol, etc., etc. Those claims come from one guy. His name is Alexander Hislop. What you have to understand is this work was produced in about 1850, right? So it's a pretty old work in regards to like modern theology, archaeology, historicity, right? Now, in the realm of humanity, right, especially Christianity, it's very, very new, right? So Alexander Hislop wrote a book called The Two Babylons, right, which obviously I own. I've read it, unfortunately. It's The Two Babylons, or The Papal Worship Proved to be the Worship of Nimrod. Now, obviously, you can see off the jump, right, off the rip, it's targeting papal worship, right? It's targeting Catholicism, proved to be the worship of Nimrod, right? Now, in this book, by the way, he calls Mary the beast in Revelation, the image of the beast in Revelation. Um, Basically calls Catholics partakers of the beast, right? Basically trying to paint Catholics as satanic as you can paint someone, right? Which makes sense for his work because, again, this is a polemic, right? This is basically an apologetic. The problem is that it is extremely deceptive. It uses some fabricated, but some real archaeology, some historical findings, falsified historical findings, right? Straw man's, failed methodologies, all throughout this book, right? All throughout it. He misused a ton of archaeological and historical data by men who didn't even believe the same things that he did, right? So he took findings basically like, okay, if there's a triangle, right? There's a triangle found somewhere. Oh, the triangle means the Trinity, right? Well, when you look back in ancient peoples, there's squiggly lines, there's horizontal lines, there's vertical lines, there's squares, there's triangles. There's all types of shapes, right? A shape does not automatically mean, oh, look, there's the Trinity. The Trinity's pagan, right? So that's the kind of nonsense that's in this book. Now, some people might say, oh, well, you really have to look in there and you got to read and you got to research it and really just do your own research, right? Now, the interesting thing about that is, and this is a pro tip whenever someone says that, whenever someone says do your own research, like, oh, well, I've pointed you the right direction, you got to do your own research, right? If they can't show you, right, if they can't substantiate their claims to you, but they're saying things like, oh, Christmas is pagan, Easter is pagan, whatever, right? Christ wasn't born on he wasn't born on December 25th, right? First of all, if you have no idea how that even came to be that day, you need to take a step back, right? So if you look, and I want to say it's in the Talmud, the Jewish Talmud, right? It records that, and you'll see this in the thesis that's released, by the way. But it records that Moses had a fully divine life, and his death was on his conception, right? So that's how that came to be, basically, right? So you were conceived, 9 months later you were born, right? Well, when you look at the Passover, the death, it's in that same time frame, right? 9 months prior to December. Now, again, the two Babylons. This is not even a very long book. It's really not. Um, it's a 244-page book, depending on the binding that you get, right? 244 pages. Now, every single book that you see here contradicts Alexander Hislop. The Oxford History of Christian Worship, which, by the way, there's like over 30 scholars alone that are in here, contradicts him. The entire series from Yaroslav Pelikan, who actually was a scholar, who was a Yale professor for over like 30 years, I think, right? The dude is like the books that are here that you see, these authors are, just the authors alone are more credentialed than this dude, right? And these aren't polemics, right? they, they don't have to be polemics, right? This is just history, how it's recorded. But the Oxford History of Christian Worship, Yaroslav Pelikan, it actually took him, I think, over a decade to write this series. Actually, really, really good series. The Emergence, actually, The Christian Tradition, A History and the Development of Doctrine, I think is the full title of the series. It's a 5-part series, right? When you look at things like the Ante-Nicene Fathers, right? Creeds of the Churches, On the Trinity by Augustine, Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History, right? When they talk about, when this guy, right, Alexander Hislop says, Easter is pagan, right? You know what's interesting? I've scouted, because you can actually get this book online. You can search the book online, right? Those of you who know about history or about Easter, right? Easter was initially celebrated on the same day as Passover, right? Well, there was a controversy called the Quattrodeciman controversy. Now, the early Christians were celebrating Easter on Passover, right? And it was actually called Pascha, right, which means Passover. But they were celebrating Christ on Passover. They weren't celebrating the traditional Jewish Passover. They were celebrating Christ. The Lord's Day had already been established because that's when Christ resurrected, right? That's how we got the Lord's Day. So when people try to say something like, the Sabbath wasn't on Sunday, the Sabbath is on Friday. Well, Sunday was never meant to be the Sabbath. It was meant to be the Lord's Day, right? This is why if like Orthodox Christians, they have Vespers. They're basically honoring, if you will, that Sabbath. There's obviously more reasons for that, but that's one of the reasons, right? And also to prep them for the Divine Liturgy, for Orthros, all that. But anyways, the Quattrodeciman controversy was basically a debate where they were trying to determine, okay, are we going to celebrate Easter or we're going to celebrate Pascha, right, which again is Easter. And I'll get into that, how that got its name, by the way, into Easter, because that people like to confuse that. The Quattrodeciman controversy, they were basically celebrating Passover on Nisan 14. Well, if you've ever celebrated Passover, which I have, you would know it's not always the same exact day, right? It's not always the same exact day. So what the early church decided to do was they decided to make it to where, well, we're just going to celebrate it on Sunday, which is the Lord's Day, right? Which is why they decided this. Celebrate it on the Lord's Day so that all Christians everywhere can celebrate the resurrection of Christ, right? They can celebrate the resurrection of Christ on the Lord's Day. Now, you can actually read about this in Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History. Now, some people will say that, well, there's certain parts of Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History which are skeptical, right? But if you look at Polycarp, and this is, if you know Polycarp, he was one of the oldest church fathers that we have writings of, right? We have Ignatius of Antioch, and we have Polycarp, right? Those are the two oldest ones that we have, and you can find their writings, by the way, in here. But anyways, Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History records Polycarp speaking with I forgot the guy's name. He was a bishop in Rome, I believe. I forget his name. But he spoke with him about the Quattrodeciman controversy, and again is about Easter. The interesting thing about that is I've scoured this book, and again I've searched this book online, and I couldn't find the use of Quattrodeciman anywhere in Alexander Hislop's book, which I find interesting. If you can find it, let me know. I'd love to read it. I want to see what he says about it because I know whatever he says about it is probably BS. I almost forgot. In regards to Easter getting its name, Easter got its name in like the 8th century, I think, somewhere around like the 8th century, I believe. And it's because the entire month was labeled as Easter, I think, by Germanic peoples, right? That's how it got its name. It was a linguistic development. It wasn't a theological development, right? So the word Easter has nothing to do with Eostre in the sense of, or Ishtar, right? In the sense of theological development, right? If that's your entire contention, then just celebrate Easter and call it Pascha, right? Who cares? If you want to be in line with the historicity of the church, but it's not a theological issue, right? It was a linguistic development over time. Language develops. Oh my gosh, who would have thought, right? In regards to like the bunnies and the eggs, oh, it means fertility. Did you ever think that maybe, I don't know, when do bunnies appear? Would you say they appear around springtime? Shocker, right? That's so surprising. Wow. Easter and having the pastel colors. Oh, wow. Did you ever think that maybe flowers tend to have kind of like pastel colors, lighter colors? I mean, it's really ridiculous. All of this to say, right? Because I can go on for hours. Because it's here, right? I'm not telling you to get all these books, by the way, because these are expensive, right? These are not cheap books at all. I just kept hearing about this Alexander Hislop dude, so actually reading this stuff, and we say, oh wow, a lot of what he said is just absolute nonsense. Now, I'm going to show you a few books that I recommend that you do get, and some of them are actually very, very affordable and don't really cost much of anything, thankfully. And also, I want to say that yes, these books were read, but also I've read the Hebrew Scriptures, right? This is the Messianic Judaism. This is the Messianic Scriptures, right? This is what Messianic Jews use, right, for their Bible. So there's that. And this obviously is going to use the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Old Testament, right? Also read the Orthodox Study Bible. Now, the Orthodox Study Bible is unique because it uses the Septuagint, right? The Septuagint is the Greek Old Testament. The Septuagint was written for Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria, Egypt. To provide some context, this is a freeze frame. It was written by 70 Jewish scholars, and so Septuagint actually means the 70, referencing those Jewish scholars. So it's not like it was just written by anybody, just so you know. And if you actually look at the direct quotations in the New Testament quoting the Old Testament, 2/3 of those quotes are pulled directly from the Septuagint, not the Masoretic text. The Septuagint Old Testament, it was circulated well before Christ was on the earth, right before he actually walked on the earth and became incarnate as a human. But the Masoretic text, which is in here, was canonized over 800 years after Christ. So something to kind of consider. So the Septuagint is actually what the apostles and Christ himself used for their scriptures. I also have this right here. This is a New King James Bible, right? And I have this one here. This is the New English Translation Bible, Thomas Nelson Full Notes Edition, and this uses the Masoretic as well because this is considered Protestant, right? Now I'm going to show you the beauty of this Bible right here. Whenever let me go ahead and lower the camera. So when I open this up here, you can see those are the verses, and these are the notes as to why certain things were chosen, right? Certain words were chosen. If you know anything about basically the laws that scribes use in order to determine what is most accurate, right? It's incredibly important, right? So if you want to know like why you have certain verses, why some verses are omitted, right? This is the Bible that you want to read. This will give you all that information and much more. So it's not like these were just read for the sake of an apologetic against Alexander Hislop, but no, there were 4 Bibles that were also used as well, right? So just to kind of get that out of the way. Now, the books that I recommend you get, again, this is a very, very cheap book, and this guy actually sacrificed his career for the truth. This is the Babylon Connection, ? By Mr. Ralph Woodrow. Ralph Woodrow initially agreed with Alexander Hislop, but after doing a little bit more research into the claims that Hislop made, he was like, wait a second, this stuff isn't even true. This is nonsense, right? It's just not true. And so Ralph Woodrow wrote the Babylon Connection. Now, he actually went very lighthearted into critiquing Alexander Hislop's work, but it does enough just to show you, right, the nonsense that Hislop claimed in the 2 Babylons. And it's a very, very short book, right? Believe me, it does not take a lot to prove that Alexander Hislop was, he misused data, misrepresented different findings from other people. It's a 120-page book. I read it within like 3 hours, right? Very, very short book to read. That is the Babylon Connection by Ralph Woodrow. And by the way, after basically supporting, because he was a Protestant, after supporting Hislop's claim, that obviously kind of boosted him up because they were fighting against, at least Hislop was fighting against Catholicism because it was spreading throughout the region. And so that's why the 2 Babylons was written to begin with, right? It was basically to prove, okay, well, look, Catholics worship Nimrod, right? That's why this was written. So, but Ralph Woodrow agreed with him at first, and then after he looked a little bit deeper, he went back on his word, and he kind of lost his career for the truth, right? So, hats off to Ralph Woodrow. You really need to get this book. I highly recommend it. Again, it's a very, very cheap book. You could probably get it for less than $10, right? And it's a very short, very sweet book. Secondly, I highly recommend you get, this one is not as cheap, but you need to get it. This is The Stations of the Sun, A History of the Ritual Year in Britain. And this is by Mr. Ronald Hutton, who is a historian. And you can see, obviously, Oxford right there if you care about that. And, Mr. Hutton is much more credentialed, again, than what Alexander Hislop is. But there's some great information in here about Christmas, Easter, all those holidays being pagan. This is the book that will clear up those nonsensical claims. And so really just these 2, right? Really just these 2 are all you really need, because Ralph Woodrow, he more so critiques Hislop's methodologies, that, basically how he concluded his claims. So that's really what this does, the Babylon Connection. What Ronald Hutton is doing in this book, The Stations of the Sun, it's not even really to critique Hislop, I don't think. It's more so just he's an actual historian, right? it's reporting on historical fact, what we have, what we don't have, what is speculative, what is not speculative, right? It's not really a biased view in regards, because he's a historian, right? He just reports on history and then what that history can and cannot mean, et cetera, et cetera. So, highly recommend this. I do recommend also The Emergence of the Catholic Tradition by Yaroslav Pelikan. That's the first in his series that we talked about earlier, his 5-part series. Now, whenever you see the word Catholic, that's not Catholic as in the Catholic Church, right? Catholic simply means universal. So whenever you see the Catholic tradition, it's referring to the universal tradition of Christianity, right? So if you want to see like the first 600, because it goes through year 100 to 600 after Christ, if you want to see what the development looks like, then you want to read the first part in his series. You can get this book for less than $30, but obviously if you get all 5 of them, you're going to be paying, over $100. So yeah, The Stations of the Sun by Ronald Hutton, The Babylon Connection by Ralph Woodrow, and The Emergence of the Catholic Tradition by Yaroslav Pelikan. And again, that does not mean Catholic as in the Pope. It means Catholic as in universal, right? Next, there's a lot of claims made by Hislop. Again, he makes falsified historical claims, falsified archaeological claims, right? But also falsified theological claims. Now, I recommend that you read this guy, or this book here, Theology of the Old Testament. This is Testimony, Dispute, Advocacy, and this is by Walter Brueggemann, if that's how you pronounce it, right? Certainly a unique last name there. But Theology of the Old Testament, Walter is considered one of the leading Old Testament scholars. Again, much more credentialed than Mr. Hislop. So yeah, I recommend you get this book. It's not cheap, or it's not cheap, so you're gonna have to invest, but it's worth it. Next is it's actually 4-part series, and this is by Mr. N.T. Wright, another leading scholar. This is actually one of the leading scholars in the New Testament, and this is Paul and the Faithfulness of God, and this is part 1 and 2, and then there's part 3 and 4, which is much thicker, much more information, and you can see 3 and 4 there. And this is by, again, Mr. N.T. Wright, and that's Paul and the Faithfulness of God, right? So, and why am I even mentioning all these different pieces of literature? Because one of the biggest problems that you're seeing right now with Christians, generally speaking, is that they'll read a verse and they'll say, "Oh, that's what this means." And they'll come to their own revelation, their own epiphany, right? Oh, that it's got to mean this because this is what makes sense to me, right? Well, unless you actually read scholarly works, you think, like, I'll put it to you this way. We made a video a while back, we posted on Patreon, called Heretical Exegesis, where a quote unquote ordained pastor, he was basically trying to remove Christ out of the Godhead. And he was using the Strong's concordances to do so without actually knowing how to use Strong's concordances, or he did know how to use it, which is what I think, and he was purposely trying to twist the verse and removing Christ out of the Old Testament by taking out a possessive noun, right? And that's what I'm talking, like, it's little things like that that you have to know, like, you have to know what to look for, because you can take out one word and change an entire verse, the meaning of the verse, everything else, right? So you have to be very careful and be very diligent whenever you come to these conclusions, and you got to be really careful. And you can find almost anything on the internet, because just like Alexander Hislop here, right, can write a book and it can be filled with nonsense, flawed methodologies, misused data, everything else. It's even easier for someone to create a website, to buy a domain, and then just regurgitate the jargon they believe is true, right? So you can find almost you can find a website agreeing with almost every single view that someone will have, right? So you need to go to the actual literature, right? Go to the literature, and it's more reliable than just some random website, right? And then these people who've dedicated their entire lives to this stuff, right? These are people who've dedicated their entire careers. We're talking like over 50 years, right? 60 years in some cases. These people have dedicated their lives to this stuff. And how arrogant is it to say that, oh, well, we just have the revelation because God told us, right? God told us. And we're just discounting the entire work of these people, right? It's very arrogant to think something like that. So you really need to kind of, get off social media, and, all of us really need to get off social media and put our heads in some books. But I'm going to show you the last one here that I recommend. And I recommend these for this set for just understanding the end times, because a lot of people, including Hislop himself, right, misinterprets either accidentally or purposefully the Book of Revelation, and twists it into something that it's not. Um, and this is very true with dispensationalists, right? John Darby, all those guys. People who are infatuated with the Book of Revelation, with apocalyptic literature, not even knowing what that even is, by the way, not knowing how to read it, how to interpret it. But they'll tell you that, what this means, what that means, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll make these false correlations throughout the scriptures because the same word is used somewhere, or correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things are like or they're similar does not mean they're directly related, right? These are basic rules whenever you're actually trying to pull an exegesis, right? These are hermeneutical methods to understanding scripture. But this guy here is the leading scholar on Revelation, and his name is David On, or David Un, and you can see it's Revelation 1 through 5, so chapters 1 through 5, and this is Word Biblical Commentary, Revelation 1 through 5, and this is 52a. There's 52b, which is Revelation 6 through 16, and 52c, Revelation 17 through 22. So he covers, all of Revelation. And again, this is like the leading scholar on Revelation. There's no question about it, right? The guy's like the leading scholar that we have currently. And I'm not appealing to authority, right, when citing this information, because a lot of this stuff is just like historical accounts, right, archaeological accounts. But to discount these people and not even give them the time of day while acting like we understand this stuff, and you've been a Christian for what, 5, 10, 20, even 30 years, when these people have dedicated like 50 years of their life to this stuff, right? And being a Christian does not mean that you are hard learned, right? It's not what that means. These people have actually put in the time to understand this stuff, the cultural context, everything else. So those are the books that I recommend, to understand certain things, especially your holidays. I highly recommend this book. If you want to see how much BS the Two Babylons is, you can just read The Babylon Connection by Ralph Woodrow. Like this refutes it. This small book refutes it, right? It shows you how silly Alexander Hislop's claims are. And then of course, if you want to understand, you can get more into the Old Testament, theology of the Old Testament, highly recommend it. Again, this guy is a leading scholar in the Old Testament. Paul and the Faithfulness of God by N.T. Wright. He is like the leading Pauline scholar. And yeah, we'll be releasing the thesis here shortly, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a long one, but I think it's necessary because I think I know people are being led astray, right? Had a conversation with someone earlier where they were just so certain, and that's the scary part, right? They're so certain that Christmas is celebrating Nimrod and Tammuz. They're so certain. That's the scary thing. Because whenever you start talking about faith and what people believe, where they're going to go whenever they leave this life, right? You get some very, 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 very strong convictions. And it's real scary what can happen whenever you twist that into something that it's not, something that is completely fabricated, and people are now believing this, right? So I know the atheists will enjoy that line, and they'll probably comment and chat if they lasted this long about believing stuff that's not true. Ha ha ha, right? Um, Former atheist, right? So I can kind of pit how they think. But yeah, guys. Hopefully you stayed this long. If not, sorry. Like I said, it's a long video. I get it, but we'll release the thesis on Facebook and also on Instagram. It's been on Patreon for over a month, right? If you're not on Patreon, you should be there. We talk about stuff like this and much more. That's patreon.com/sanctified survival. I'll put a link down in the video, bottom of the video, but also in the description if we remember to do that. So, but yeah, guys, I appreciate you. I hope this helps you out. And I'm sorry, right? I'm sorry that people took this crap and convinced you that it was something other than fabrication. Because when I started looking into all this stuff, uh, I was very upset, very, very upset. Um, and yeah, like I'm sorry, right? I thank God that He gave me the discernment to never demonize Christmas, Easter, nothing like that. To never demonize Catholics or Orthodox Christians. Um, I thank God that He gave me that discernment after I became Christian. Because when I was an atheist, it was everyone's catching strays. So, um, but yeah, so you guys have the books that we recommended. Please read them. You'll see very quickly how nonsensical the claims made by Hislop are. And again, the majority of those claims that he made originated with him. He took previous works and fabricated them even more so. Um, and yeah, we appreciate you guys. Look forward to the thesis being sent out. Whenever you see this video, right, you'll see the thesis released as the next post. Again, you'll see it on Facebook. You'll see it on Instagram. It's been on Patreon for a month again, right? And I'll see if we can post all of it because it's about 30, 35 pages, I think. So we'll see if we can post it on those different platforms. So yeah, stay tuned, and we appreciate you guys. We love you guys. Again, I'm sorry if this upset you. It upset me when I first started looking into it. Um, and yeah, God bless, guys. Remember to always, 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 again, stay sanctified and study to show yourself approved. God bless.